Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Welcome to Business Innovators Radio. You're with Samantha Alford. Today's guest expert is Richard Kolomy from Valentine Constructions. He helps construction companies successfully deliver commercial projects on time and on budget. And he's going to share with us some of his tips today to how to do exactly that. Richard, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Samantha. It's great to be here.
Thanks for that. So, Richard, your company is Valentine Constructions, and you're a construction project manager. And when I was doing some of the research around this area in this discipline, I was curious about what exactly a construction project manager is, and is that different to a construction manager, and how does that flex across the industries?
A construction manager is much more involved in the day-to-day management of a particular project, for instance. So a company will engage with a developer, or they might be doing the development in-house. And what their construction manager does is he focuses mainly on that single project, maybe two projects at the most, but they generally focus on one project if it's large enough. And they basically organise the day-to-day activities and the programming for that project to ensure it runs smoothly, runs on time and runs on budget. A project manager works at a little bit more of a distance to that. They're much more involved in office-type works, feasibility studies and contract administration, choosing certain types of sub-trades that will be working on site based on their tender price. So they'll put tenders out, they'll get the contracts signed and then engage certain individuals. They also get involved in the design aspects of buildings, so the very early stages prior to construction, and also do final costings and budgets to ensure that the project comes in on time and on budget, and also liaising with banks, obviously, to ensure that the progress payments are adequate for the duration of the project. So that's much more the project manager's role. A construction project manager's role generally dips into both of those sides. So they're much more of a diverse person. They can work on the feasibility, the early works, as well as managing the actual construction process itself.
And do different projects require different types of roles, or do they kind of all span all sorts of projects?
No, it definitely depends on the size of the project. So large inner city projects, something that might be 50 floors or something like that, is so large that it requires more than one individual. So then you have a certain type of, if you like to call it hierarchical, you could, but you have foremans, obviously, gang leaders, foremans, site managers, construction managers, and then project managers. And there's a whole line of individuals. The smaller the project, you don't need as many different layers of people to manage the individuals. As you can imagine, on a large project, it's quite difficult to manage materials handling and things like that. One individual can't keep an eye on a large project.
It sounds pretty complex. I'm curious about Valentine Constructions specifically, and what kind of clients that you help, because it can be quite a broad industry, as I understand it.
Yes, the construction industry changes a lot. It's very cyclical in nature. You never know what your next project's going to be. If you pigeonhole yourself into a certain type of a client or process that you engage in, when that area slows down, such as mining at the moment is a good example, then you don't have anywhere else to go from there. So it's very important to be very diverse and to be able to dip into industrial projects, commercial projects, and even domestic projects, no matter how big or small you are. When you start looking at smaller projects like the domestic sector, it's a bit difficult to compete with project home builders because they've got their own industry in itself, so that's quite separated. But working for individual clients to build their houses or something that might be at a higher architectural standard, that's definitely the area that you diversify into.
Do some of those industries have their own quirks when it comes to project managing and managing those sorts of projects? Are there? I can imagine, mining would be quite different to residential construction, or are there some principles that apply throughout?
Well, a lot of principles overlap, but I suppose the bureaucracy changes a lot. So OH&S is probably a good example. If you're working in the mining sector, they've got a certain standard, whereas if you're working on somebody's house, it's a lot different. So you've got to deal with things differently. It might be much more paper-based, depending on if you're working on an industrial installation. As you can imagine, large commercial project's got a lot more people and a lot more trades working on it, whereas an industrial complex might be even larger in scale but have less amount of trades on site and less materials on site, so slightly easier to manage even though it's larger scale. So the industry does change quite dramatically from industry to industry, but the actual construction processes are very similar. You're still working with concrete, you're still working with bricks, you're still working with steel. So the skills required are quite similar. It's just the management does change quite dramatically from industry to industry.
Yeah, wow. It's fascinating. Do you find that in the current climate, particularly in Australia, are there, you mentioned that the mining industry has sort of gone into a bit of decline. Are there projects that tend to be more contemporary and higher demand currently?
Well, at the moment, the local market in Sydney and Newcastle's actually booming in the housing sector, and definitely the higher end market, which is quite unusual. Who can judge what happens? I mean, we had a recession in the late 80s that was quite large, and then we had the GFC, so things have been up and down. But currently, there's quite a boom in the investment market, which is mostly unit development. So yeah, at the moment, mining's down and that investment market's up. So you have to be very quick to change and apply yourself to where the need is at the time.
Yeah, that sounds like it makes sense. I'm curious about what actually led you to this field. I mean, it's quite a complex environment. How did you come to be an expert in this environment?
Well, I started an apprenticeship in bridge building, and I worked for a civil engineering company, and we built bridges out west and also in the city. We had to travel fairly long distances. It was very interesting work, but then a family friend approached me and asked me whether I'd be interested in working on high-rise buildings in Sydney. Based on my skill background building bridges, we did a lot of things in concrete. They don't build bridges out of timber anymore. So yeah, I ended up on a large construction project in Sydney, and in particular, I was working on the lift cores, which are generally roughly 2 floors above the main structure. So you're always at the highest end of the building at any one time. And as a young lad, that was quite exciting and quite a hazardous job, which made it a bit more exciting. Yeah, so it was a great introduction to the industry and how complex it was, and I was extremely interested in how the process was managed and how you could pull so many people together to put these amazing structures up. I never looked back.
And just talking about all those people and bringing them together, I mean, I can imagine it would be quite challenging when you've got so many components, even talking about the structure of bridges and buildings and that sort of thing. I mean, we've all seen the YouTube videos and the photos of bridges and buildings that don't quite meet in the middle. I mean, how do you even go about coordinating all of that, not just labour, but technical skill and physical construction materials and so on? That must be an enormous challenge.
Well, it's a great question because it's a good example you just brought up, how bridges don't meet together and whatever. And good builders always say, you're not a good builder by the mistakes you don't make, it's how well you fix your mistakes. So the process is actually solving problems on your feet, obviously, and that's the excitement of the industry, especially for a construction manager in general, because they're on the cold face And what happens is they're the ones that have to have the answers instantly at any one time. Because if you can't answer an important question straight away, then it holds the project up. So a good construction manager's got enough skills, either personally or access to the right people, where they're able to draw on that expertise and solve a problem instantly for any individual on site. So the project is constantly moving forward. So in a lot of cases, the project finds its own life. You've obviously got a set of drawings to follow, and the engineering is extremely important because that's structural. But a lot of the time, it does find its own life. And at the end of the project, sometimes it's not exactly what the original drawings showed.
Well, trust me, I know the feeling of that. We renovated our house recently, and the upstairs drawings showed the stairs going one way and the downstairs drawings showed it going another way, and that was an interesting conversation when it came time to make the decision. And I sketch a point about being able to make decisions quickly and knowing enough about the intent and the purpose and the use of the structure would allow you, I guess, to make more informed decisions and quick decisions around the right way to go for that.
Yes, definitely. It's very important to be able to solve problems. That's the crux of a construction manager's job, because they don't have the luxury of time. So they do need to be very quick and think on their feet. And most construction managers are very manic in that way. They work very fast. They don't sleep much. They spend a lot of hours on the job. So you have to enjoy your work.
I imagine. And what would you say is the most common obstacle preventing construction companies or builders or organisations that are building commercially to deliver on time and on budget? What would you say is the main obstacle there in that industry?
Well, I like to explain it to people in the sense of of any project, really, there's probably three main elements that, whether it's domestic, industrial, commercial, that are at the forefront. And safety, quality, and economy are always working against each other in any one aspect. So obviously, you want everyone to go home at the end of the day. You don't want any injuries on site. You want to ensure that everybody's working safely. But at the same time, the job has to be completed on time within a certain budget, which brings the economy into it. And at the same time, you're also trying to achieve a high-quality project. So all those three elements actually work against each other. They contradict each other in a way. And to manage those three processes so you end up with a good outcome is the constant three words that should be on any construction or project manager's or developer's mind at any one time to ensure that, time and cost come in while those three elements are being addressed throughout the whole project.
Yeah,
yes.
It's a fascinating way to look at it, and I guess, certainly for listeners to the program, in terms of insights, I think that gives us a great insight into the challenges and the obstacles associated with that. Are there misconceptions associated with building either related to those three elements, or are they general misconceptions when people embark on these sorts of projects?
Well, a lot of people misjudge, uneducated people misjudge what a building should cost to build or how much it does actually cost to build. Mm-hmm. So cost becomes an issue a lot of the time. That's quite different on a lot of projects. There are some issues relating to trades, obviously. The industry does have a bad name in a lot of cases, especially when it relates to quality and cost. The industry's full of stories of the tradesmen that come over, charged us a fortune, and we ended up with the doors don't close or things like this. So, yeah, we do suffer with a bad reputation in that sense, but not everybody's in that boat. But the unsuspecting client can get caught out, especially when they're trying to get a real budget job done. Everyone's trying to save money, so you can end up on the wrong end of the stick.
And actually, just on that, you've been in the industry a long time and you've seen a lot of things in terms of the industry. Would you say that over time quality has decreased with some of the innovations that the industry has, or do you think that those innovations support quality?
Well, it's more of a personal view, I think. Obviously, there's different products that perform a lot better than products of old did. For instance, there's a lot of composite products that work extremely well in the industry. They might be a lot more costly. In a lot of cases, the costs have been brought down and they perform just as well as products used to. The time factor has something to do with it. People don't have as much time to put as much pride in their work. For instance, to build like they used to build beautiful old heritage buildings. I mean, you can't budget for something like that. Nobody's got an endless checkbook, so things are done fairly basically now, and everyone's looking for a quicker way to method of construction to cut down costs. So I think to answer your question, I don't think the quality's worse now than it was. I think we work in an environment where time's of the essence and money's of the essence. So we end up with a product that reflects that. So we're not trying to build buildings that, like the pyramids, that last for 5,000 years. We build buildings that last 50 or 100 years. So in that sense, the budget's down, the quality might not be as high, but we also don't have the life cycle we require of a building that we needed before, for instance.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective, actually. So, Richard, what are some of the biggest issues that you would have, for example, for a construction manager on a large project as opposed to some of the smaller projects?
Okay, well, one of the biggest issues a construction manager faces on a large multi-story project especially is, well, there's probably two main ones. The supply of materials and materials handling. So we call one of them supply chain management. So as you can imagine, on any project, at any one time you can have 40 plus trades on site, and each one requires different materials and different delivery times. So managing that process is quite arduous, ensuring that certain people are booked in at certain times. In most cases, you've only got one crane on site. If you've got the luxury of two cranes, that's great. But you can imagine the process when you've got two or three trucks lining up and you've got to get them unloaded. And then on top of that, you've got to look at the materials handling process of that. So once that material's arrived on site on time, without causing problems to the whole neighbourhood, you've managed to unload the gear, you then have to try and get it to the area that those people are working. And there's many different ways of doing that in relation to using forklifts or trolleys or dollies, wheelbarrows or anything of the type. So there's, that's a constant challenge to any construction manager, and that's what keeps the job at ease and good harmony within the workplace. If the guys don't have to walk down 2 floors to grab one stick of timber, then that makes a big difference to everybody, and everybody can get their job done with a lot less stress and hassle. So they're the two main elements a construction manager should focus on, that supply chain and the materials handling.
And I imagine you've alluded to something there as well, which is that you're not necessarily managing the people that are specifically allocated to the job. You're also having to manage access to the site, neighbouring properties, council regulations, all that sort of thing, time of start and stop associated with that. So I imagine that contributes to making that supply chain management and materials handling all the more complex, because you don't have unrestricted access and you're having to deal with the, shall we say, regulations associated with all of that as well. Is that right?
Yeah, the regulations can be quite arduous. This requires a lot of pre-planning prior to the construction starting, because you do have all sorts of different DA restrictions, which are your development application restrictions imposed to you by the council and any other regulatory authority that might be involved in the process, organisations such as the unions or work cover and so on. So it's important that you're aware of all of those. You preempt all of those prior to construction. So when you're under full steam, you're fully aware of those, and you can ensure that you protect yourself all the way down to parking inspectors and anything like that. And obviously the neighbours, because if you annoy the neighbours, they can cause a lot of trouble for you. You've got to ensure that the neighbours are living in harmony with a construction building right beside them, which is a never good thing. And another thing we didn't cover as yet is waste management as well, which is a huge issue because anything that comes into the building, about half of it has to go back out in relation to offcuts and packaging and so on. So, and if you turn your back on that, before you know it, you can't move on site. So the third process is also ensuring that the waste is managed appropriately. Nowadays it has to be sorted. Most of it has to be recycled because of the costs of dumping mixed waste is off the charts. So waste management has, especially recently, has become a major issue in our industry, and that's another part of pre-planning prior to construction.
Wow, just going through all of these issues and challenges, talking about dealing with council regulations, unions, workplace health and safety, all of those sorts of things. I imagine it takes quite some years to get experience across all of these areas, and to have all of that experience, in the one or two roles on a project must be very challenging to come by.
Yeah, it is challenging. It takes a certain personality. You have to be temperate and patient, and ensure that you don't put people offside. You don't get into arguments you don't need to get into. You have to be firm, obviously, because it's easy for people to walk over you, but you have to be fair and listen to people. And that way everything should be harmonious, and that's the key. If you get a bad personality in the mix, like I stated before, things can unravel very quickly.
You mentioned that one of the biggest challenges or obstacles to overcome relate to understanding the true cost of a building and what's involved and the time that it takes as well. What can construction companies do to avoid or overcome some of that misunderstanding or misconception around the cost associated with that and delivering their project successfully?
Well, I suppose there's a few ways that they can approach it. So one important thing is to research the people you're going to surround yourself with if you're going to undertake a project. If you're doing something small like a house or whatever, obviously a lot of these people come from word of mouth. So you can have some form of trust there because there's some line of relationship. You can maybe look at what the builder's been involved with before and whether that's come in on time and on budget. So you're building something similar, so you can be sure of that. The other thing, if you're an expert client, because there is two types of clients. There's an expert client and a client that has no expertise in construction. Mm-hmm. So both require a different level of understanding of the industry. An expert client, for instance, I would say to them that they have to be open-minded to look at various innovative building methods and construction types and be willing to take on new processes to save money and time. There's a great product that we're using at the moment, which is a prefabricated formwork concrete wall, and that's taking the industry by storm at the moment. These things take a long time to be accepted by the industry, and not many of them make it through bricks and mortar, which is your basic construction types. But this one has, so it's a great example of a product that a lot of builders are using now because it saves them time and money, and it performs just as well as the materials it's replaced.
And are you finding that the greater level of expertise of the client, the greater willingness to try some of those more advanced materials because the client is more sophisticated in that way, or what are your experiences with that?
No, I think definitely not. A lot of experienced clients have got a formula and they don't like deviating from that formula. So it takes some time to convince them of other methods of constructions. I know other large builders that still use exactly the same processes, and up until recently, some that were even reluctant to bring computers into their companies because what had worked for them so well for so long was paper-based work. And they like to do everything from basic principles and use a formula that's tested.
Yeah, and I guess it's it's the known versus the unknown, isn't it? It's a challenge in many industries. Have you in the past been brought into shall we say, fix up or rectify issues with projects partway through? Have you had to, I guess, inherit other people's challenges in terms of construction that's partway through, or have you typically gone, straight from the outset in the early design stages right all the way through?
No, we're definitely involved in both. A lot of times I'm asked to come and consult on bad construction projects or projects that have gone bad, or where problems are appearing after other people have done construction work. So yeah, always highly involved in that area and called upon, mainly because of diversity of experience, obviously. But yeah, both ways, definitely fix up. There's always fix-up work at times does come up, but mainly consultation in that area more than anything.
Okay, and has there been a time, for example, something has just been unrectifiable, and I'm just fascinated to know, these things just you'll drive past, you'll see the cranes, and I've often wondered, does it ever go horribly wrong, or does it usually get resolved?
No, everything gets resolved. Money can fix everything. That's another term that we use in our industry. And if you've got an endless checkbook, you can always rectify things. But at the end of the day, it boils down to the experience of your team and how they go about. And that includes engineers and architects, designers, and anybody else involved in the project to form the cheapest, quickest solution to a catastrophe, if you want to call it that. Which does occur sometimes, but you've just got to, that makes the project more interesting if you can pull it back and rectify it and to the client's expectations.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like a fascinating challenge, and I can imagine many sleepless nights, as you mentioned earlier. What would be your best piece of advice to a construction builder, regardless of the industry, who is considering embarking on one of these projects? It might be someone that has experience in it, or it might be someone that doesn't, to avoid some of those disasters.
Well, I think if you're going to start out, you can't be too ambitious or idealistic, obviously. The construction industry is a very old industry. It's very easy to research what people have done before you if you're coming into the industry as a newcomer. You don't have to do anything groundbreaking or amazing or change the world. The industry's actually almost impossible to change. It's very set in its ways. The mindset of all the components and the individuals involved in it, if you're talking about carpenters and plumbers and electricians and tilers and all that, it's very traditional work. They've done things the same way for many years, and they're reluctant to change, obviously. So you can embark on those kind of projects once you're established, you know the landscape, and you're very confident and competent in the area. But as a newcomer, my biggest advice would be not to be too idealistic and bite off more than you can chew, and take on a project that's quite simple to start off, and then see how you go from there, which is a much easier project to manage and cost out.
And in looking for project managers specifically and contract managers and that kind of stuff, what's the most important thing that they should be thinking about in terms of acquiring those skills onto their job?
You mean as in sourcing individuals to do that?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's extremely important to ensure that there's two frames of mind in this. One is that office, a lot of it's office-based now, OH&S, highly paper-based in relation to contracts, liabilities with insurances. If you're applying for government contracts and the like, it's a high document process, and they like to employ university students or people with degrees from this area that have got some formal training in construction and computer usage and contract administration and programming and software and all this kind of thing. And then they like to train these people themselves in-house to ensure that they work according to their processes. So that's one kind of individual you can source if you've got the time to mould them into somebody that you want them to be. So you get them with the core skills and the skills to learn and problem solve, which is a well-educated university student, and then mould them into what you want. So then from the other perspective, which is what a lot of builders do, is they get somebody that's much more astute from the trades. So somebody that's been around the traps, that's worked on the tools, that understands the process intimately, and has then worked their way through to management positions. And they like those kinds of people, although they may be more stubborn and hard-headed and hard to mould. They definitely bring a whole set of skills that takes a long time to teach somebody else that you might get that might be green from the university. So there are two chains of thought on that. One is getting an experienced guy from the trades or getting a guy from uni. It depends on what you want, what your resources are, and how you want to run your business.
And in terms of the experience with the trades, is part of this role about earning respect from the trades on a job, and does it make it easier if someone has had a background in the trades, or is that a little bit divorced from this role these days?
Now, again, there's two sides to the story, like everything. Of course, it's much easier to get respect from your trades if you've worked with them on site. But, I mean, I think 90% of it is a personality issue in reality. And if you're an approachable person that wants to solve people's problems and wants to help them do their job better and helps them to excel and increase their profits, make their job easier and all the rest of it, you don't really have to come from a perspective of experience, but you have to have a certain personality that lends itself to that so people respect you off the bat. You can get the most experienced guy on earth. If the guys don't respect him, then he'll be no use to you. Or you can get somebody with not much experience, but he's very good with people, and the guys will respect him. So, and that person can learn very quickly as well. So you just need the guy that's got the right personality, I think, more importantly.
Yeah. And do you find there are many construction clients that want to do or that attempt to do this work themselves, that think that they can manage the project themselves as well as, be the client, and does that cause challenges?
Yeah, it definitely causes challenges. There's not many people like that. The only developer builders that exist are either very small time, that just build a small block of 3 units or a house here and there, or very big time like Lend-Lease or Mirvax that do their own subdivisions and then build 200 units at a time. In between, it's very difficult in between those two extremes, because if you're going to develop and build, then you need the resources to source future projects as well. And look at more opportunities to keep your people employed. And if you're bogged down in a building somewhere, then where do you get the time and the resources to do that? So you either have to be extremely well-resourced, like these large companies are, the top 5, or be very small time where you just do one at a time and you don't care if you have a year off. So in between is definitely a split where it's developer and builder as a separate entity. At the top echelon and low down, there are many developer builders.
And thanks for that. I guess I'm interested now in you've also published some materials and have a website in relation to some of your expertise. What's the best way for construction companies, owners, clients, and other builders to find out more about your expertise and your experience in this industry?
Well, they can look me up on my website, obviously, which is quite easy to do, or they can call me. My phone number's there. If they're local, they can give me a call. So there's no problem whatsoever. And I'm also on some other social forums which are easily accessible on the internet.
And I'll just give our listeners those details. So the website that you have, I understand, is www.richardkolomy.com. And your best email address, is it richard@richardkolomy.com?
Yes, that's correct.
All right, fantastic. Richard, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge today. I've certainly learned a heap about construction that I had never appreciated previously. And I think those three elements of safety, quality, and economy, and managing those three elements is obviously quite a challenging task. And obviously, I can tell from your background and your experience over quite a number of years in a variety of industries that you've certainly had to deal with some of those challenges, as well as some of the people side of project management as well. So I really appreciate your time on the show today, and thanks very much for coming on.
Thanks for your time, Samantha. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.